Thank you very much, Drummond. I'm delighted to be here. Drummond modestly didn't mention his own formative role in terms of helping to make this film happen. Also, there's another guy you'll hear from later on in the economic panel, Rob Johnson, who is one of the executive producers of the film. So it's all of these things are connected, so I'm delighted to be here. I'm going to show a little clip from the film out of order. I'm going to show something toward the end, and then I'll attempt to explain it, talk a little bit about how it came about and why this subject is fundamentally important to the notion of democracy. So let's look at a quick clip first, and then I'll come back on and speak a little bit about how this happened and what the impact was and what I hope the impact will continue to be, and why this subject is so important to the essence of democracy.
This debate is occurring because of the Supreme Court's ruling that said that we must conduct ourselves under the Common Article 3 of the Geneva Convention. And that Common Article 3 says that there will be no outrages upon human dignity. It's very vague. What does that mean?
Do you believe that the use of testimony, which is obtained through techniques such as waterboarding, stress positions, intimidating use of military dogs, sleep deprivation, sensory deprivation, forced nudity, would be consistent with Common Article 3?
Well, sir, I think most importantly, I can't imagine that such testimony would be reliable.
Mr. Attorney General, do you believe that statements obtained through illegal, inhumane treatment which should be admissible?
Senator, well, again, I'll say this. The concern that I would have about such a prohibition is, what does it mean, how you define it?
And who would define it? The Bush administration introduced a new law that would elude the restrictions of the Supreme Court.
In a legal sense, I think they wanted to discard the Constitution, and they wanted to write a new one. But you can't do that, so what you do is you throw a new interpretation on the old one. And the new interpretation is the executive in wartime, and perhaps this war is going to last forever, is all-powerful.
Congress gave the president most of what he wanted. He would agree to abide by the Geneva Conventions, so long as he could define their meaning and application. A few detainees at Guantanamo might be put on trial, but the rest would no longer have access to habeas corpus, the fundamental legal right to challenge their detention. Planning a run for president, even Senator McCain voted for the bill, soon after the Bush administration threatened to discredit him with conservative voters.
Buried deep inside this legislation is a provision that will pardon President Bush and all the members of his administration of any possible crimes connected with the torture and mistreatment of detainees, dated all the way back to September 11, 2001. At least President Nixon had Gerald Ford to do his dirty work. President Bush is trying to pardon himself.
The pardon did not extend to frontline soldiers.
The trial was a very confusing time for me because I've never been through trial before. I didn't know what was really going on. I kind of just understood that, I was facing a lot of time in jail. That's the only thing I really understood about the whole thing.
Well, I was sent to jail, went to a military correctional facility. I've lost my full-time job. I have a bad conduct discharge, which has hindered me in getting a new job in the same field. Financially, it's just devastated me.
I'm just glad it's over. That's it. Glad I can get on with my life.
I had to plead guilty to assault and 2 counts of dereliction of duty. In exchange, they'd say that I could go to jail for no more than 4 months.
Rather than spend the money that was being spent for that trial, I think it could have been better spent in working on Army doctrine to make sure that other people go into battle properly equipped, properly led, and with a full understanding as to what their new roles and responsibilities are.
When a detainee is abused, or a detainee claims abuse, they want somebody to take the fall for it. And it's not going to be the person with eagles or stars on their shoulder.
No officer was ever convicted in the Dilawar case. Following her service at Abu Ghraib, Captain Carolyn Wood was given a staff position at the Army Interrogation School in Fort Huachuca, Arizona.
What does that reflect in terms of senior leadership's intentions? Not to eradicate the abuse, but to perpetuate the abuse.
I think the probabilities exist that there will be other terrorist attacks, that more Americans will die. And the argument that we have to apply abuse to detainees in order to protect American lives, I find to be violative of our deepest values and to the very safety of our country. We fight not only to protect lives, we fight to protect our principles.
Thank you. It's a little bit difficult for those of you who haven't seen the film to come in at the end like that. I was asked initially to do a film about torture, whether or not the United States had a policy of torture. On the face of it, it seemed a pretty simple, if daunting task, and yet what I discovered was that the more I got into it, the more complicated a subject it was. It wasn't just torture bad. There were avenues in this subject that led directly to some fundamental issues in democracy. And I was also daunted as a filmmaker as to how to make a subject about something that most people don't really want to think about, and that was a kind of a topic. And so I ended up focusing on, the film is called Taxi to the Dark Side. I ended up focusing on the case of a taxicab driver, an Afghan taxicab driver named Dilawar, who had never spent a night away from home. He was 22 years old, a very slight man, if handsome, 122 pounds, I believe. And he was taken from his village and brought to the Bagram prison in Afghanistan, where he was subjected to a 5-day interrogation. And after the 5th day, he died. And it was later learned that he died from wounds sustained in that interrogation. The Army coroner said that his legs had been pulpified, and he died of a pulmonary embolism. And so that case became a key case to follow it, not only to follow what happened in the field as a kind of a mystery story, but to take that case and follow it throughout the system. It was one of the reasons I chose the story of Dilawar, because the very people who interrogated him were later shipped on to a rather more famous interrogation facility known as Abu Ghraib. He was a taxicab driver. The 3 passengers who were in his taxicab were sent to Guantanamo to cover up for the crime. They were nothing more than peanut farmers. They spent 18 months in Guantanamo, at which point they were released. Most of us may know that, I believe, as of 2004, 93% of the detainees in Guantanamo were not captured by U.S. or coalition forces. So it emphasized that aspect. But the other thing that the Dilawar story emphasized was something very haunting to me. You know, in the original New York Times article that I read about it, it noted that it was a 5-day interrogation, but it also noted that after the 3rd day, the interrogators had pretty much concluded that Dilawar was innocent, and yet they continued to torture him for another 2 days until he died. That haunted me, because it seemed like, what is it about the inexorability of torture? Why would they continue to torture somebody when they knew that person was innocent?